Following a return pit stop at Circe's palace for some last-minute instructions and a proper burial for the fallen crewmate Alpanor, they bid adieu and set sail toward Thrinacia, the land of Helios. On their way toward the island with Helios's cattle, they first passed the island of the Sirens, a group of half-women, half-bird or such beings that sing enticing songs no man can resist. Each crew member inserts beeswax into their ears to deafen the siren's song, except Odysseus. Earlier, Circe tells Odysseus that he alone can hear the sirens, but his crew will have to tie him securely to his shipmast, lest he jump off board toward the sirens. As they sail past, the sirens hear the ship oars and begin their song. Quote, "Never has any sailor passed our shores in his black craft until he has heard the honeyed voices pouring from our lips, and once he hears to his heart's content sails on, a wiser man." End quote. In a related note, Professor Emily Wilson at the University of Pennsylvania has an interesting take on the above passage and a slightly different interpretation in her recent translation. Quote, "Now you stop your ship and listen to our voices. All those who pass this way hear honeyed song poured from our mouths. The music brings them joy, and they go on their way with greater knowledge." End quote. The important difference here is the word, quote, unquote, lips with the word, quote, unquote, mouths. The popular translation I read is by Robert Fagles. Other translations include the word, quote, unquote, lips as well. Wilson argues that ancient Greek has a clear word for, quote, unquote, mouths that was included in the original passage, but has been modified and perpetuated over time to be, quote, unquote, lips. I think the important point here is whereas the storied Greek nymphs were often depicted as young, sexy, and fertile, the emphasis with the sirens is more related to some kind of higher wisdom, rather than something sexual or sensual. Using quote-unquote lips as a descriptor rather than quote-unquote mouths may detract from the emphasis of wisdom through song or wisdom from sound, which is the offering of the sirens. Further, to me, this knowledge is depicted as something reserved for the gods alone, and because of its power, mortals go insane when they hear it. Thus, the need for beeswax. Also of note, Odysseus is the only one allowed to hear it, by way of Circe's instructions. There is an interesting relationship between Odysseus, intelligence, wisdom, and Athena, the goddess of wisdom. This passage reinforces this relationship. Two final thoughts. Are these sirens related to the Judeo-Christian angels? Is the song of the sirens cousin to the forbidden knowledge in the Garden of Eden? Surely, it seems, there is a historic or cultural connection. The sirens successfully in their wake, the men continue their passage past a man-eating monster Scylla, dwelling on a cliffside, and Charybdis, a sea-dwelling monster nearby, whose mouth creates a giant whirlpool. More men are lost after Scylla snatches some of their boats and eats them as they pass by. At the least, they avoid Charybdis and make it to the land of Helios and his cattle. Odysseus's men had earlier sworn an oath not to eat Helios's cattle, but with their rations running dry and with south-blowing wind keeping their boats unsailable, they give in to hunger and slaughter some cattle. With bellies full, the west wind picks up and they sail out to sea. But Helios had already pleaded with Zeus. "Father Zeus, the rest of you blissful gods who never die, punish them all, that crew of Laertes' son Odysseus. What an outrage, unless they pay me back in blood for the butchery of my herds. Down I go to the house of death and blaze among the dead." End quote. Zeus hears his appeal and promises to strike their ship when they are sailing on the wine-dark sea. Soon after, he follows through and the crew are met with a thunderstorm. Zeus sends lightning bolts against the ship, sending the crew into the sea, all but Odysseus, never to be seen again. Thinking fast in the water, Odysseus lashes the floating mast and keel into a makeshift raft. He climbs aboard. The winds change and send him doubling back towards Scylla and Charybdis. His raft heading into the mouth of Charybdis, Odysseus grasps a tree overhanging from the nearby sidewall underneath the lair of Scylla. He holds it tight and waits, and soon Charybdis spits out his raft. He releases his grasp and swims toward the raft, mounts it, then rows. Quote, I rowed hard with my hands right through the straits, and the father of men and gods did not see Scylla. Thinking fast in the water, Odysseus lashes on the floating mast and keel into a makeshift raft. He climbs aboard. The winds change and send him doubling back towards Scylla and Charybdis. His raft heading into the mouth of Charybdis, Odysseus grasps a tree overhanging from the nearby sidewall, underneath the lair of Scylla. He holds tight and waits, and soon Charybdis spits up his raft. He releases his grasp and swims toward the raft, mounts it, then rows. Quote, I rowed hard with my hands right through the straits, and the father of men and gods did not let Scylla see me, else I'd have died on the spot. No escape from death. End quote. For 10 nights he drifts until landing on the island of Ogygia, home of the goddess Calypso. He remains on the island for another 10 years, a slave. Alcinous and the Phaeacians are moved by his tale and put on a great feast in honor. They provide him with gifts and a ship, and he finally sails to Ithaca. Athena appears once again to assist with the final stretch. For him to return home without his men and against the suitors would be disastrous. After they land on Ithaca, Athena covers him in a mist and hides Odysseus, and she transforms his face. Quote, she shriveled the supple skin on his lithe limbs, stripped the russet curls from his head, covering his body toe to toe with the wrinkled hide of an old man, and dimmed the fire in his eyes, so shining once. End quote. She then leads him to a swineherd's place where he's invited in for food and shelter. Odysseus keeps his true identity concealed. After Telemachus returns home from searching for his father, he reunites with him at the swineherd's lodge. With help from Athena, Odysseus temporarily transforms into his younger self, to the disbelief of Telemachus, who promptly, quote, threw his arms around his great father, sobbing uncontrollably as the deep desire for tears welled up in both. End quote. They discuss their strategy to reclaim his home. Telemachus is to return to the city with no news of his father, and Odysseus is to enter the city as an old beggar with the help of the swineherd. From there, they will reclaim his home. Eventually, Odysseus, as a beggar, reunites with Penelope in his home. She is ignorant of his true identity, but nonetheless, they build rapport. Odysseus provides her with a portent following her description of a dream. Quote, dear woman, twist it however you like. Your dream can only mean one thing. Odysseus told you himself. He'll make it come to pass. Destruction is clear for each and every suitor. Not a soul escapes his death and doom. End quote. Doubtful at the thought, Penelope responds to him with her plans for a suitor's trial for her hand in marriage. Whoever can string a bow and shoot an arrow through 12 axe handles, she will marry and end the standoff. Later, the suitors gather in the great hall for the trial, and they try their luck at stringing the bow, all futile attempts. One by one, they give up in disappointment and anger. Odysseus, still looking like an old beggar, steps up to try his luck, to the ridicule of the suitors. Quote, sly old fox. Maybe he's got bows like it stored in his house. End quote. One of the men bursts out. Of course, Odysseus strings the bow to the suitor's horror. Then he promptly shoots an arrow through all 12 axe heads. Next, he strings an arrow and fires one at Antinous, the leader of the suitors. Quote, but Odysseus aimed and shot Antinous square in the throat, and the point went stabbing clean through the soft neck and out, and off to the side he pitched. The cup dropped from his grasp as the shaft sank home, and the man's lifeblood came spurting from his nostrils, thick red jets. A sudden thrust of his foot, he kicked away at the table. Food showered across the floor, the bread and meat soaked in a swirl of bloody filth. End quote. Oh, what a lovely feast. Earlier, loyal men, Eumaeus, the swineherd, who provided Odysseus with shelter and food, and Philoides, a cowherd, locked the hall doors from the outside, keeping all men within. Telemachus gathered some weapons and armor from a back room, and along with his father, they slaughter the remainder of the men stuck in the hall. With the majority of threats now taken out, Odysseus turns his attention to his prior servants. They have been disloyal during his time of absence. One of his servant priests falls to Odysseus' knees and begs, quote, I hug your knees, Odysseus, mercy, spare my life. My hands are clean, and I am to die their death. Look at the hands I get for years of service. End quote. Odysseus is not impressed with the man's plea and follows. Only a priest, a prophet for this mob, you say? How hard you must have prayed in my own house that the heady day of my return would never dawn. My dear wife would be yours, would bear your children, for that there's no escape from grueling death. You die. End quote. And so Odysseus picks up a sword on the ground and, quote, hacked the prophet square across the neck, and the praying head went tumbling down in the dust. End quote.